So Eve, thank you so much for joining me to talk about your lovely Josh today. So we're just going to have a chat about what his experience and what your experience as a family has been, because we're trying to raise some awareness about brain tumours and perhaps how things could and should have been done differently for Josh.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you ever so much for having me, because I appreciate that this is a topic that's not really spoken about. Definitely as a family, we knew nothing about brain tumours prior to Josh being diagnosed. And, we went on a real journey before we got to that diagnosis. So I think it's really important that signs and symptoms are widely known, because they're quite common symptoms for a number of different things. So in Josh's instance, Josh started to get a headache around the 26th of June this year. Just a normal headache, that increased in severity over the coming days. And he lives with his partner, Tash, and their 4-year-old son, AJ. And he wasn't able to go to work because this headache was causing him significant pain. Initially, you put it down to a headache, don't you? Everyone gets a headache. Take some paracetamol, take some ibuprofen, normal cures, and then some sickness started. So he started getting the severe headaches to the point that he was banging his head against the wall because he was in so much pain. And being sick intermittently during that period. This went on for about 14 days. And we were like, Josh, something needs to happen here, because this is not a headache, which we initially thought. And then we thought maybe it's migraine, maybe it's a cluster migraine. This is why it's going on for a number of days. And so maybe that's what the issue is here. So 14 days, we were like, this is not right. This really isn't right, Josh. We need to do something. Josh wasn't getting out of bed. He was being sick, hanging onto his head all of the time. So the 12th of July, Joshua's dad went round to Josh's home, picked Josh up, and we took him to our local hospital. Now, we were just looking for an answer. We were looking for an answer. This isn't a headache. It's not a migraine. But the symptoms are the same: severe pain in the head, sickness. What could this be? And I get a call from Josh, who says they've given me a scan. They think I've got appendicitis. I've got a raised the sign of infection in my urine. They think I've got appendicitis. And I said to him, how can you have appendicitis? You've got a headache. You've got a headache and sickness. And he said to me, I think the doctor said that it was referred pain. That I'm feeling pain in my head. You can get referred pain somewhere else in your body for something else going on. And in all honesty, I was relieved, because I thought, we've got the answer. I was very dubious about it, because I'm like, I still couldn't get over the fact that it was appendicitis and Josh had only got a headache and sickness, and no stomach pain, probably slightly tender tummy because he had been being sick for 2 weeks, but no pain for his appendix or anything like that, because I know that can be quite excruciating pain in your stomach. Nothing like that. So but just relieved that we had an answer. The next day, so that was the 12th, so the 13th, they removed Joshua's appendix. And we were like, fantastic, this is great. He'll recover from his appendicitis. We can get on with our lives. Josh can get on being a dad. And then the headaches persisted. So that they let him out on the 14th at 5 o'clock in the morning, a day after his operation. And almost from the minute he got home, he was complaining his headache, was still being sick. And then additionally to that, he had the pain from obviously just having an operation. Was taken back by ambulance on the 15th with this headache, sickness, and obviously extra pain. and they observed him for 24 hours. During that time, they basically couldn't find anything wrong with him. They discharged him still with his headache and sickness. And then shortly after that, Tash took him back up to the hospital. She sent me a text and said that his speech was off and he seemed confused. They gave him a CT scan, and I actually have the text from Joshua around that CT scan, and he says to me, there's an anomaly on the scan, but they say it's caused by the scan machine. That to me was where they missed the presence of the brain tumour. So we went back and forward for another couple of times because they'd ruled out anything was wrong with his head. And then every time we went thereafter, I don't know that anyone ever revisited that scan. We went back on the 7th of August, and I am told by the doctor there, well, actually, sorry, apologies. Prior to that, Josh had gone to the hospital. He had spoken to a doctor. We had a very bad incident at the hospital that night. Josh had gone with Tash. They had done Joshua's blood tests. Josh had previously taken recreational drugs prior in his life. He had. We were honest with the hospital when we first went to the hospital, and honest every time that we went, that it had happened previously, that he'd stopped. He hadn't had anything. He had a blood test taken at the hospital. He had, a drip up, and they basically said to him, the doctor came back and basically ripped it out of his arm and said that Josh had lied about taking drugs. And what it had actually been had been that they had found opioids in his blood. But what they had failed to notice is that they'd actually given Josh codeine after he had had his appendix removed. One of the nurses who was working that night knew Josh from when he'd been in previously, spoke to the doctor, who then came back and apologised and said that someone had rubbed him up the wrong way. And Josh felt massive frustration that no one was listening to him. He was there, in pain, and no one was listening. No one was listening. So I said to Josh, came back, he was still really, really poorly. So the 6th of August, I go to the hospital with Josh. I'm thinking maybe Josh isn't explaining well enough. He's a young lad, he's 25. Maybe no one's just taking him seriously. I'm going to go, and I'm going to make sure we get the answers that we need. So the doctor says, you've been back many, many times, and I said, look, I feel like people just think Josh is coming for drugs. You've given him tramadol, diazepam, codeine. You've given him all of these things, but no one's got an answer as what's wrong with my son. And he said, what do you want me to do? And I said to him, I want you to find out what is wrong with my son. We went through his symptoms. We talked about all the previous times that we'd been into the hospital. And this was the 5th time. So he said, I'll look at Josh from afresh. And I'm thinking, we're going to get somewhere here. This is going to be it. He then does all his tests and basically tells me that A&E is for people with life-threatening illnesses. Josh doesn't have a life-threatening illness. We should stop wasting the time of the A&E doctors and the ambulance service. And if I insist as a mum to have an MRI scan, which is what I was asking for, then I needed to be referred by my doctor. So the very next day we called Josh's doctor. I can't imagine how this period felt for Josh, because I can't imagine having something physically wrong with me and no one believing me. I think that's the most difficult thing to get my head around in this whole scenario. And then we ring the doctor. The doctor says Josh is being over medicated. I will not see you, Josh, for 4 weeks. Come back to me. Stop taking all your painkillers, everything. Cold turkey for 4 weeks. Come back to me in 4 weeks' time and I'll consider referring you. So we did. We trusted the doctors. We trusted they knew what they were talking about, and we did. We stopped Josh's painkillers, everything. That from that day, he had no codeine, he had nothing, not even a paracetamol. So a week later, Tash and AJ had gone away to the beach. Josh was too poorly to go. So he'd gone to stay at my mum's because we were that concerned with him. You know, he was really unwell. And he collapsed at my mum's. And that's when an ambulance came and took him to a different hospital. And that really is how we ended up getting the diagnosis we got. So Josh got taken to a different local hospital to us, and they did a CT scan there. Once the CT scan had been done, the A&E doctor straight away picked up that there was something not quite right with the CT scan. She pulled the scan from our previous hospital visit, compared them, and they were the same. And she at the time thought Josh was having potentially mini strokes or something like that. There was something showing, and she asked for an urgent MRI scan, which Josh had the next morning. And later that day, we found out that Josh had a massive brain tumour. So that was sort of, I think, the sort of 15th of August, I think, something like that. The 25th of August, seizures start. So Josh starts getting really uncontrollable seizures, but very different seizures as well. So not just like you would expect, maybe an epileptic waving arms and stuff. Josh could have seizures that were just eye flickering. So his body would be quite still in itself, but the flickering of eye movement. Some were more volatile. He would, in most cases, feel when they were coming. And they were followed by lots of confusion. And I do wonder, actually, if Josh had potentially had a seizure the day that he collapsed at my mum's, and that's what caused him to collapse. And we just didn't realise that that's what it was. So very, very quickly then, we knew that it was a large brain tumour. Josh then had, I think we went to King's on the 1st. We got transferred to King's on the 1st of September. Josh had his biopsy on the 5th of September, which is my birthday. And I think the 8th, if I recollect correctly, 8th of September, we found out that it was a midline diffuse glioma. And we thought, you know, we knew from what we thought it would be anyway. We knew that the survival rate was very, very, you know, it was pretty non-existent for those kinds of tumours. And we'd been reading about 8 to 11 months and things like that. And we heard then, obviously, 2 to 3 months. And in fact, actually, Josh only lasted for another 10 days before he died at our local hospice. But I think for us, the most important thing to get out to people is, if somebody presents to you with a headache and sickness, that you must consider brain tumour, because it's just so important. You know, I think not being heard, like for Josh, was so difficult. You know, a 25-year-old man does not want to sit for 9, 10, 11 hours waiting to see a doctor, especially more than once. You know, there definitely feels that there is something that should have been spotted earlier than that. I don't think it would have changed Joshua's outcome at all. I don't. I think that what would have happened, that we would have known what Josh had earlier, which would have potentially given us a little bit more time with him knowing that that was going to happen. But Josh was the bravest, you know, strongest person that I have ever known. He didn't ever complain.
No.
He just got on with it. And I think that maybe that went in his detriment a little bit, because even though we were going to the hospital, he wasn't kicking up a fuss. You know, maybe I did a little bit the last time I went, because I was like, I need you to do this. I need you to find out what is wrong with my son, please. Like, this is, you know, I'm a mother begging you to find out. And I think if I was to give anyone an advice that could be in the same situation as Josh, it would be, go and get that second opinion. Go somewhere else. Go be seen somewhere else, because I wish now that I had done that. I kept taking Josh back to the same hospital, thinking they're going to see there's a pattern here. They're going to see that they're, you know, this 25-year-old boy is sick. You know, this isn't a just, I want to get off of work or whatever. This boy is very, very sick. And I think because potentially maybe the seizures didn't start until later when we were in hospital, had he been having seizures, maybe then it might have been considered. But the fact that for a long time he'd had the headache and the sickness, that was really the symptoms that he had. But prolonged headache and sickness should be massively taken, you know, as a red flag for any doctor. The consideration of brain tumour has to be there, because, you know, brain tumour is the biggest killer of people under 40, of all cancers. And that's just absolutely shocking. And like I said at the beginning, you know, as a family, we knew nothing about brain tumour, or how little funds get put into brain tumour research. And, you know, it's all so shocking to us as a family. And to the lost our son, I think it was sort of 34 days, something like that, from diagnosis, you know, of a brain tumour to Josh dying. You know, it's brain tumours are wrecking, you know, lives. And, you know, I think because it's maybe a complex cancer, no one really wants to put the funds into it. But, you know, I think breast cancer, I think if I'm right, you've got something like 75% more chance of living through breast cancer today than 40 years ago. Whereas with brain tumour, you've got exactly the same chance as you had 40 years ago, which is none, you know, for these aggressive cancers. It's so slim, you know, that we have to be pushing, one, for doctors to diagnose these, to realise that simple symptoms like headache and sickness are massive warning flags for brain tumours. So we need to get that out there. We need to get out that for all those people that might be sitting there currently unheard, that we need to listen to these people. It's so important that we listen as, you know, as professionals. It's so important that they listen to these people. You know, people don't want to spend time in A&E and a hospital, and don't want to be not able to go to work because they're sick. So please listen. And if there's somebody out there that's not being listened to, please go somewhere else. Please go somewhere else and be heard, because there will be someone that will hear you. You just need to find that person. And for us, that was the doctor in the A&E at the other hospital.
And I think that's what Josh's message was, really, wasn't it? Because actually he was a 25-year-old with no medical history. He's got a 4-year-old son, and he was self-employed. So he wasn't a young man who wanted to be off work, because he wasn't earning any money, and he had his family that he was providing for, and he had never had anything wrong with him.
Absolutely.
And I think for him, although he was incredibly pragmatic about his prognosis and made some really brave decisions about trying to have some quality of life for the time he had, and that was much shorter than any of us could have imagined, he felt that he'd been cheated out of that knowledge and that time of when he'd first become unwell, when he could have accepted what was going on, but then used that time in a way that he would have chosen.
No, that's absolutely right. And I know that obviously we were with Josh when he got the sort of outcome of the biopsy, and the timeline, which is what he wanted to know right from the beginning. And I think for him, the first thing he said is, they've robbed me. They've robbed me of time. And that's something you can never get back. You know, that's
very
something
precious
that
time.
It is, especially when it's so short. So every second is so precious. But you're absolutely right. Yeah, he had never been ill. He'd been healthy, self-employed. So he had no money coming in. But he was determined, that no one go through this not being heard again. He was so determined that the day that we had the brain tumour, 2 hours after he had the biopsy done on his brain, he did the interview for ITV with Rags Martel, because, and you wouldn't know it from that he'd just had this operation, but it was so important to him because he just didn't want anybody else out there to go through what he's been through about not being heard. Having information, even if it's information you don't want, is power. He could have made different decisions potentially. He could have put more things in place potentially had he known. There's so many different things that would have happened if we'd known earlier. And I think Josh was just all about, no one should go through this. Doctors should be very aware of what these symptoms and signs are. The general public should be very aware of what these signs and symptoms are, because we automatically think young people are healthy, and yet this cancer is taking our children away from us. So it's, all he wanted to do was get it out there, get out about brain tumour research, get out about the symptoms, and get out to doctors and to the public what these symptoms are, and how you can spot it and what you need to do.
And we'll include a link to his interview that he did with ITV, and his story, we can see, has gone around the world, hasn't it? So actually he's already achieving that goal that he set out to. I think the Washington Post, the New York Times had picked it up. So from that interview, he really is getting the message out there.
Yeah, he absolutely is. I mean, we had no idea when the press release went out just how wide that message would spread. And I think that we are in a position, to be able to spread that word. And that's what I want to carry on doing for Josh. I really want to get out there and to be spreading this, this information, because, like I said, brain tumour wasn't even on our line of sight. It never had been. And I don't think it is until you're affected by it. So it's so important that we get it out there, the information out there, and we speak about it as often as we speak about the other cancers like breast cancer and lung cancer and all of those other cancers. But brain cancer is kind of the hidden one. And it, like I said, it takes our children, and it's just more than important than ever that we get this information out there to people and people take it seriously.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And thank you, Eve, for sharing Josh's story, because we all loved him in the short time we got to meet him. And I can only imagine in his short 25 years how many people that he had the same effect on.
He really did. Yeah, he really did. And he absolutely fell in love with everybody at King's, everybody at Queen Elizabeth Hospital, and everybody at the hospice. It's, everyone took such great care of him. And we will be forever thankful to you all, for the short time that Josh had with everybody, because it made our journey so much easier. so
Well,
much
let's get
easier.
his message out there.
Yes.
So we will include the link for his story, so people can see Josh in his own words for himself. But thank you for taking the time. I know it's very raw for you and very hard to have these conversations, but he'd have been very proud that you were.
Thank you, Vicky. Yeah, it's so important to us. So thank you very much.
Thank you.